Hi, everybody. First, just like the other moderators, I wanted to thank the hosts and the organizers for having us here today and letting me invite these stellar journalists here for today's panel. My name is Emily Copeland. I'm Associate Director at Science Communication Network, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting environmental health scientists and advocates in their efforts to contribute to public dialogue about their work through the media. We provide media training and coaching specific to environmental health, which includes shale and public health. Research, and we also maintain a large network of science and health journalists in order to inform them regarding the important work that you all are doing here today. An interesting point that I think many people don't know is local media often maintains a higher trust level than national and mainstream news. The vast majority, over 75% of Americans, desire independent local news to guide their daily decisions. Quite simply, people want to know what's going to affect them and their families, and they want to hear it from others who live where they live and share their experiences. So in my many years of working with scientists, medical professionals, advocates, I can understand and very much empathize that approaching and working with journalists can feel intimidating, right? It can make you feel nervous. However, all of you here today are doing really important work to protect the public health in Southwest Pennsylvania and beyond. So your best efforts, your passion, and your purpose should be shared with your community. And an important medium for sharing that work is through your local and regional media outlets. So at the end of this panel, my goal is that you will feel more comfortable and more prepared to approach the media with your stories and your work. And my hope is today demystifies quite a bit what it's like to be a reporter, how they approach news, and then so you can ultimately be empowered to approach these journalists and other local journalists with your work. So I'm fortunate that the folks sitting up here today, our panelists, agreed to be here today. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Reed. Thank you, Quinn. Collectively, they have just an immense experience and knowledge in journalism, and we're extremely lucky to have them share their wisdom and their advice today. So please also, throughout the session, throughout the panel, please submit your questions. We'll be doing questions after each of them speak for a little bit and share their experiences. So first, I would like to introduce Susan Phillips. Susan Phillips is a senior reporter and editor covering climate, energy, and environment as part of the WHYY News Climate Desk. She's a founding member of the award-winning State Impact Pennsylvania website and a member of NPR's Energy and Environment coverage team. So welcome, Susan. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Great to be here. I just want to, is this my slides? Where are my slides? Okay, no problem. So yeah, the example, I know this is a shale gas conference, but my example, and I covered shale for years, but I haven't recently, so I wanted to give you an example of my recent coverage, which the most recent public health story I did where, I had to dig into the data and also, sort of find the kind of perfect person to illustrate that data. So yeah, I guess we're waiting for this to come up, but that's okay. I'll just keep talking. Because I think one of the points I wanted to make, and I'm seeing PK here and also Tracy over there, I've worked with both of them in this regard where, it's one thing to have the data and the statistics. It's another thing to sort of be able to tell that story in a way that people can relate to. And that's usually with, sort of focusing on one person's story. And that one person's story can illustrate what a lot of people in the community are experiencing. So it was up there. Did it disappear? I mean, I have it on my computer too. What's that? Okay. All right, well, I'll just keep talking. So the origin of this story I was going to kind of show you and talk about came through a collaboration with Climate Central. I don't know if folks know of Climate Central, but they're a really great organization. They work with, they have a lot of scientists on staff. And they approached me and said, hey, we have some data about high heat and its impact on an aging population. So, not there yet. Okay. So anyway, yeah, so, they had all the data, but my job was basically to write a web story and a radio story that would illustrate that data. And there is a difference between web and radio if you're working with journalists. It's always good to have good characters, people in your story that are impacted by public health issues. But with radio, it is so important. Because otherwise, we're just on the air giving you a list of statistics, and that's boring, right? Nobody's going to listen to that. So you really need somebody who's interesting, who's dynamic, who can talk, who's kind of a character that the listener can relate to, okay? And she's there somewhere, I don't know, but... And anyway, so what I had to do to sort of find this woman, where is she? No, not pediatric cancer. Yeah. This is just par for the course for my week. I can't even tell you that, Monday morning I woke up and walked into my bathroom and my bathroom sink just crashed onto the floor in a million pieces, water going everywhere. So I am not surprised by this at all. Also, I thought I was going to have an easy day as like a general assignment reporter on Monday, and then the federal judge handed down a decision about the president's house, and I was like jumping into something I had never covered before, but it was fun because she quoted George Orwell. So, there we go.
Thank you.
Yay. Okay. Uh-oh. Okay, well, you saw. You saw her.
Perfect.
So, yeah, so I just wanted to sort of, this was my main character here. So how did I find this woman, right? I part of me was like, well, okay, so we had data about high heat. If you want to go to the next slide, if you can, I don't know. Whoops, the purple map.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, so we had this data about how, the average temperature in everywhere, but especially Philadelphia, is increasing, right? And then we also, if you want to go to the next slide, had data like, sort of per like zip code about how the heat is actually higher in environmental justice neighborhoods. Environmental justice basically means, people of color or low income. And you can see that's a map of Philadelphia. And the purple area, is where, it's just hotter because there's not as many trees. You can see like, if you look and see where some of those lighter colors are, those are parks, right? There's Fairmount Park at the bottom of the city. There's FDR Park. There's a lot of trees in those lighter colored areas. In those darker colored areas, there's not. And there's a lot of, association between less trees and redlining, which other people have done research on. But basically, these urban hotspots are impacting poor communities and people of color a lot worse, right? It's not just that they're hotter. They can't afford air conditioning as much. They don't necessarily have air conditioning, right? And these row homes in Philadelphia are like basically heat boxes in the summer. They were not designed to cool down in the summer. They've been doing a lot of good work changing the black roofs to white roofs, but if you've got a black roof in one of those purple areas, you're gonna suffer. So, at any rate, the goal was to find someone who can illustrate the story that we had data that showed heat is rising and it's impacting people of color and poor people worse. And I also wanted to have the aging angle because elderly people suffer more from heat, we know. So how did I get this woman? That's always the key, and that's where I wanted to like sort of make the point to you guys that if you are pitching a story like this, like the woman from Louisiana had some examples that I thought were really great, you have to get the person that illustrates that data, right? And how do you do that as a journalist? Well, I could go knocking on doors in that purple area, which actually at some point I was so desperate I almost did. But, it's really like sources like you guys. Like, so what I did was I just called every, like, in Philadelphia they have community centers specifically for elderly people, right? Where people can go, and it's usually lower income folks who go there. They get, free lunch oftentimes, or there's community events. So I just ended up calling every single one of those places, and it's like, can you talk to me? Is there anyone living in these areas that you know that doesn't have air conditioning, or that had some kind of health impact from heat? There was a huge, heat wave at the time. That's the other thing. I just want to back up a little bit. Timing is everything, right? Like, for a story like this, I want it to run during a heat wave, right? So Climate Central's smart. They have reporters working for them, ex-reporters working for them. They came to me with this data, I think in May or June, right? So I had time to figure this story out. Because I don't want to do this story I don't want to do this story at a time where it has to run in September, where I'm not sure there's going to be a heat wave. It's just like something we call a news hook, right? People are going to be much more interested if everyone is in their home sweating this out, right? And then they hear a story on the air like, yo, you sweating it out and you might have air conditioning. These people don't, and they're impacted in much more serious ways. So I sort of had this angle of how the city's, built environment exacerbates environmental injustice and health disparities, and, talk to her. And we can go to the next slide. Why can't I remember her name? I can't see this. Which one is this? Oh, yeah, okay. Increased cooling demand. This is the other angle I really wanted to put into my story, right? It's not just health impacts, it's economic impacts of climate change. We had some serious heat waves, and that costs people money to cool their home. And so in the case of, in this case, she didn't have air conditioning because it broke and she couldn't afford it, right? So she also, during one of the heat waves, she passed out on her couch. Health impact, right? I mean, this is what I was looking for. I was looking for somebody who had not just a home in this dark purple area, who was elderly, but who also had suffered health issues because of the heat. And that's like so important in drawing you into the story. So if you could go to the next slide. I think I was gonna try to play a little bit of this, not the whole thing, because it's too long.
On a sweltering day at the end of July, when temperatures reached a high of 99 degrees, 84-year-old Blanca Maldonado stretched out on her couch in her North Philadelphia row home beneath a ceiling fan and woke up 2 hours later, not sure whether she fell asleep or passed out.
But I woke up and I was soaking wet, and I didn't even know what time it was because I lost track of the time, because that's what I think maybe I did pass out.
Maldonado has owned her Kensington row home for more than 3 decades. And although she used to have an air conditioning unit in her kitchen window, it broke and she hasn't replaced it.
I like to save my pennies.
Today, Maldonado is cooling off with a ceiling fan along with her pet parakeet. But her house feels stuffy after 3 days of high humidity.
You can cut that. You can tell. Yeah. So I just wanted to give you an example of, all this data, all these maps, all these numbers, blah, blah, blah. But that's what I need to get people interested in the story, interested in hearing the data and the numbers. Radio, unlike print, you got to be really careful with numbers. People just, and it makes people confused. So you absolutely need somebody who illustrates those numbers, and that's sort of like my message to you. And there's her parakeet, and he was very aggressive, which we get to at the end of the story because he kind of attacks me there. But yeah, so I just wanted to make that point in that if you are interested, if you've got, a real peer-reviewed study, like the woman we heard from, not some report, but a real peer-reviewed study, it's got some interesting data, like for instance, that map she put up there, I'm very interested in that. I'm like, oh, that's a story. Look at Pennsylvania. Look at the racial disparities for who gets these jobs, that are always promised. And I already know that there was an NPR reporter, Jeff Brady, who did that story, I think several years ago. But, you can always, do it again, especially if you're a local reporter. He did it for a national. But, it has to, for a story like that, I'd have to talk to people who work there, who can talk about that disparity in those chemical plants or petroleum facilities. So yeah, so that's my talk. I probably took too much time. Yeah, so interested in hearing, your questions.
Thanks. Thank you, Susan. So next, I'd like to introduce Reed Frazier from the Allegheny Front. He covers energy for the Allegheny Front. His work has taken him as far away as Texas and Louisiana to report on the petrochemical industry, and as close to home as Greene County, Pennsylvania, to cover the shale gas boom. His award-winning work has also aired on NPR, Marketplace, and other outlets. So welcome, Reed.
Somebody's phone? Is this your phone?
Oh, whoops, sorry. I was going to time my talk, but I forgot about it.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Can you hear me? Are we feeling good about being in downtown Pittsburgh? I mean, look at this view, guys. Great building. I'd like to thank John Stoltz for getting the money to build this thing. So I didn't come with a ton of slides or much preparation at all, to be honest. But I did want to tell you a little bit about myself. A lot of you might know me, probably. I know a lot of you. I started in the journalism industry in sort of what was then a typical career path. You started in a newspaper. I started writing obituaries and movie times at a newspaper, entering the movie times in on a keyboard. It's not really, probably not done that way anymore, but I ended up covering cops and courts, local government, and eventually kind of moved into a little bit of a genre of journalism, science writing, and I really enjoyed that as a freelancer here in Pittsburgh. And a few years into that, I got an opportunity from a friend of mine who wanted to know if I wanted to work for a radio show called the Allegheny Front, which is on public radio here. No, we're not an eco-terrorist group. The Allegheny Front is a geographical strata in the Allegheny Mountains, not far from here. That's what it's named after. And if I wanted to cover the fracking industry, which I kind of knew about, but like didn't really know about. And anyway, I said yes. So I got the job, and I had just come from doing a lot of science writing, like writing about biomedicine and sort of paleontology, cool stuff. And I thought, well, this is cool. I'll get to learn all the science behind how they get the gas out of the ground and, how did it get there? And I did learn a lot of that stuff, and I thought that was going to be a lot more of my job, but it wasn't. The job was mainly what I think we would all call sort of politics and political debates. And I wasn't really prepared for, I had covered like difficult topics before, but I wasn't really prepared for the size and strength of the oil and gas industry. I'd never really covered it. It is probably one of the top 2 or 3 most powerful industries on planet Earth, and just the sheer number of public relations people and their sort of, the way they went about, dealing with you was not something I was really ready for or knew would happen. So, but I eventually got the hang of it and learned about sort of how high stakes the fracking industry here is in Pennsylvania. And so I think, what I came to understand pretty quickly was this wasn't really a science story. This was a power story. This was a story about, and when you talk about power, you talk about authority and whose voices do people believe or trust. And so that sort of started to, just affect my thinking about this whole story, not just fracking, but really anything we cover you sort of immediately are part of this power relation that you may or may not have signed up for, but you're in it. And when you're a reporter, you have a little power because you're entrusted with people's stories, like Susan's great example there of the woman in Philadelphia. I think since I have some of you in the room that I deal with on a pretty regular occasion, I think it's just like one of the questions I get a lot from like my relatives at Thanksgiving is like, how do you come up with stories? Do you come up with them yourself? Does your boss tell you what to do? And the answer is sort of like somewhere in between always. I am incredibly lucky to do what I do at the outlet that I do. I have a great boss, Kathy Nauer, who's been the executive producer there for many, many years. So she lets me get away with stuff I would not get away with at other outlets. That is for sure. But like, so a lot of stories are pretty obvious. Like, a pipeline blows up and kills a bunch of people or burns their house down. Like, yeah, you should probably go there like right now. The steel plant blew up, killed 2 people last summer. That was obviously a story we should drop everything for. You know, there's a lot of stories that we just can't get to because, like, literally there's 2 reporters on my team, and we're covering, I don't know how many square miles, but like anywhere from like Bedford County, PA to somewhere in Ohio and West Virginia, like it's sort of technically our range. And there's a lot of things we can't get to that we would like to, that are worthy. 2 things I think are important for me to sort of convey to you, I guess, is when people are listening to a story or reading a story, and you know, there's sort of a thrust of the story, there's always like sort of 2 questions that come into mind. One is, what is the evidence that you're presenting? And how good is that evidence? Like, where did it come from? A reliable source? If it came from somebody who has a penchant for making things up, you know, it's not as good as somebody who is like very trustworthy and reliable. So good information is key. When possible, I tend to rely on like peer-reviewed science when I'm talking about scientific things, I guess. Public health impacts. I like go to the EPA website and type in PFAS and health effects, and I see what the EPA says, because in this society we've sort of agreed that government agencies, well, you know, up till maybe recently, government agencies are sort of like straight shooters telling the truth. They take all the information in and they present, you know, the best information we have. I think most people would still agree with that statement. You know, like there's a lot of white papers out there. White papers are not peer-reviewed. They're research papers that a lot of places do to sort of bring an issue to the front. I mean, I think that we can all agree that's not quite the same level of, it's not given the same level of authority as like a peer-reviewed paper. So, but I do take peer-reviewed science like pretty seriously. One thing I do a lot of is like, and I just did one this week, I do stories about new papers, new science papers about health impacts on things. And one thing I try to do is vet, I mean I always do, is I talk to other scientists about that paper, which sounds like freaking obvious, but like, of course you would, but it's not really done as much as you would think, I think, in today's day and age. But so I try to be as thorough as I can with these things, because I really, I don't know, I value like our own sort of internal compass of, we are going to be people who are not going to be, like I'm lucky enough to work at a place that we don't have to kick out things like on a daily basis. We are a weekly show. You know, if somebody beats us to the punch on a story, we're like kind of okay with it. We're doing a different thing. And so I try to be as thorough as I can. And sometimes like I'll have like 7 people call me back after like nobody calls me back for 3 days. And I'll have to talk to all of them, but hopefully the story is better for it. So I'm going to stop right now. I'm sure you guys have some questions, and I wanted to give some of our other speakers a little time. But it's great to be here. Just come say hi or reach out later. The Allegheny Front is the name of the show. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reed. So our final panelist I'd like to introduce is Quinn Glabicki. He is a writer and photographer covering climate and environment for Pittsburgh's Public Source. He's also a Report for America Corps member. He uses visual and written mediums to tell stories about how people in Western Pennsylvania interact with their environment and how climate change is impacting local communities. Welcome, Quinn.
This thing. Does this work? Green button. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Quinn Glabicki. I'm a photojournalist and investigative reporter at Pittsburgh's Public Source. We're a nonprofit news outlet here. Our offices are just up the street in Uptown. I've been at Public Source about 4 years. Before that, I was a freelance photographer. But since coming to Public Source, I've really focused mainly on environmental issues in Western Pennsylvania. That tends to mean industry. And so I'm going to go through some work that we've done over the past couple years, which takes place just in our backyard down in Greene County, in Washington County, and in northern West Virginia. And then I'll talk a little bit about just kind of how we approach our work and what makes a good story for us. This is an image made in Knob Fork, West Virginia. It's a real rural place, no cell phone reception. And I was first alerted to Knob Fork back in late 2022 when I heard about 4 families living there who had been dealing with a confluence of industrial facilities, all owned by EQT, the gas firm based here in Pittsburgh. This is a long exposure image which shows the company's Sizemore well pad, which is situated kind of in the middle of a valley, down in the bottom of a valley. And the emissions from that facility have been, well, our reporting showed that they were the subject of EPA Clean Air Act investigation, which eventually grew to expand to cover all of the company's facilities in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. This is a woman named Trina Hollabaugh. She's in her house there in Knob Fork. The family, well, she's part of one of 4 families that were sickened and eventually displaced from their homes in Knob Fork over the course of several years after they began to report symptoms and filing a number of complaints with the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, the federal EPA, and a number of other agencies that largely went unheeded, which is kind of what our reporting found. You know, I'm obviously a photographer, but my work relies a lot on public records, and so for this project, we were able to file a lot of communications between not only the company and regulators, but also internally at these regulatory agencies to get an understanding of kind of the candor of their conversations with regard to how they're talking about what's going on the ground in places like Knob Fork. This is a notebook. It's written by a woman named Abby Tennant, who's the mother of one of the other families. And Abby spent the better part of 3 years detailing her and her family's symptoms in a series of notebooks. You know, I remember driving back from West Virginia, probably about a 2.5-hour drive from my house to where they lived, where they had relocated actually, just south of New Martinsville, West Virginia, along the Ohio River. But my backseat was pretty much stacked with boxes, packed full of medical records, notes, and daily journal entries that spanned more than 3 years. All of that had been given to me by Abby Tennant. She, as I mentioned, had spent years chronicling this, but what I wanted to drive home in terms of our process is really, you know, I rely a lot on the trust of the people that I'm reporting on, and you know, that trust often manifests into access. And as a photographer, it's really important to have that type of proximity and that type of intimacy in the images in order to create a compelling narrative that I think stretches farther than just that region. These notes and records, as I mentioned, it was not just the notebooks, but it was medical records, doctor's notes. They chronicled, symptoms of a number of people that spanned, extreme lethargy, respiratory problems, migraines, chest pain, rashes, crippling anxiety, and that's something that went on for years. We sourced these with official documents and correspondence from the regulators that I mentioned to basically understand how these families' experiences contrasted with the official narrative of those regulatory agencies. We uncovered a pattern. Essentially, when families complained, often in dire terms, regulators contacted the company and deferred to the company, EQT, to assess if there were problems with their own equipment. Eventually, as I mentioned, the EPA stepped in, and we were the first to report that EPA investigation into all of EQT's operations in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. But this story, this is one of the sons of one of the families. This is Garrett Hollabaugh. He endured a number of symptoms, again, including brain fog, chest pain, shortness of breath, anxiety. And then in 2024, he was actually diagnosed with connective tissue disorder and has since been hospitalized 4 times with a collapsed lung. That has been paired with a diagnosis of joint issues, scoliosis, nodules on his thyroid, anxiety, depression, and anemia. And these families, kind of in concert with one another over the course of several years, complained to regulators, as I mentioned, often in dire terms. Really just, they had at-home air monitors, which, are not necessarily regulatory grade, but, even the regulators that we were looking into said that they would be sufficient to kind of point if VOCs were up or down. And so this is kind of a photo essay that just kind of explores how they coped with that and eventually left their homes. This is a family. That's Abby Tennant in the back with her husband Scott in the foreground, and this is them packing up their home. They eventually sold all of their items or got rid of them and relocated to Abby's mother's house. These are their daughter's dolls resting outside of the house. They sealed them behind plastic, as they did with many of their kind of soft possessions, to avoid exposure to the compounds that they believed to have contaminated them. But this story really began a little bit earlier in a place called New Freeport. In New Freeport, the same company, EQT, there had been a frack out, which basically means that the pressure that had been injected by the company during their fracking at a nearby well pad had migrated beneath the ground through some combination of fissures and cracks in the geology to erupt in someone's backyard, right there along Main Street. Again, a very rural community. Immediately, residents kind of reported problems with their water, red burning rashes after showering with a chemical smell. Their animals wouldn't drink it. Researchers we interviewed, some of whom are here, they found methane-spiked water laden with heavy metals, and they found that the radius of contaminated water was only growing. At the time, the company was doing town hall meetings across their most heavily fracked counties, so in this case, Washington, Greene, and in northern West Virginia as well. And so I went to those, and at one of them, these are residents here of New Freeport, confronting EQT CEO Toby Rice there in the checkered shirt. That's their public relations person in the foreground, kind of maintaining a barrier there. But that was something that we did because the company had never engaged with us, and that's a challenge that we face as reporters because it's really important to also, of course, confront the company about whatever allegations are being levied against them. Again, they never responded to us, and so by virtue of going to these town halls, we were able to get kind of a very candid look at how they were communicating with the local communities in which they operated, and in this case, how they were responding to specific allegations from those community members. With regard to the frack out, the company had maintained and continues to maintain that they're not at fault for that incident. However, through our reporting, as I mentioned, through those communications, we were able to also uncover a video filmed the day of that frack out, which was filmed by EQT workers. And that day, the company had performed a test. They had turned off their frack, and then they turned it back on. And when they did, the gas coming out of the ground in New Freeport resumed. And we have, that video includes workers kind of describing what they call a quote-unquote direct correlation between the company's operations and the gas erupting from the ground in New Freeport. Again, the company had previously and continues to, they had argued to the State Environmental Quality Board that the incident had never occurred. I'll wrap up. I do want to give a quick update on just where these things stand currently. A couple more pictures first. This is in New Freeport. This is a resident standing in the middle of the woods next to an abandoned well, which was essentially percolating with methane. And that was something that we heard from multiple people, including DEP documents, where these old abandoned wells were just starting to bubble up with methane, and they hadn't been previously doing that before. And this is a resident named Michael Durdovich standing behind his home in nearby Deep Valley. And so this was as these reports of contaminated water were spreading, the radius of which was spreading. And that's a water tank that was supplied by the company to some residents after residents had confronted Toby Rice at the town hall. This is one of the young girls in Knob Fork in West Virginia. This is Jocelyn Kennedy. And this is her at her home that the family abandoned. And this is her packing up her belongings to move to the new house where they relocated. This is downtown New Freeport. This is Greg Hollabaugh, one of the sons of one of the families in West Virginia. Here I had gone down there and actually slept on their floor so I could be there the first day of deer hunting season, because I had wanted to photograph that. And Greg had hiked up this mountain, but he had to keep pausing every now and then, and he would just kind of lay against a tree like that and kind of wheeze for a while. And he said it never used to be like that. These are the two, Abby and Scott Tennant, two parents in West Virginia. Just a quick update, these stories are still ongoing. The families in Knob Fork spent years searching for an attorney to represent their case. They were rebuffed by all. The burden of proof was too steep. Lawyers said the thought of suing America's largest gas producer too risky. Earlier this year, though, an attorney who had read our reporting reached out to the families in West Virginia. The statute of limitations had expired for the adults. Abby, Scott, Trina, Glenn, Matt, and Dia had no path to challenge the company in court. But in August, the four children, Garrett, Jocelyn, Brooklyn, and Piper, sued EQT in federal court. That case is ongoing. And it alleges that the company knowingly exposed the children and their families to hazardous, carcinogenic, and radioactive pollutants, sickening them and forcing them to leave their childhood homes. That's a quote from the suit. As I mentioned, Garrett has since been hospitalized 4 times with a collapsed lung. And that connective tissue disorder that I had mentioned, the lawsuit attributes to silica pollution at EQT's operations nearby. Since moving away, though, most of the children and their parents have seen their health gradually improve. In New Freeport, weeks after our reporting, residents filed a class action lawsuit demanding the company provide clean water. That will probably take a while. earlier this year, 2 neighboring townships declared a state of emergency as a result of widespread reports of water contamination. And researchers at the University of Pittsburgh and Duquesne published a peer-reviewed paper that contends that EQT did in fact contaminate local water, and which cast doubts on current standards of regulatory oversight. The state DEP has not attributed any of the contamination to the company, and both that lawsuit and the paper site are reporting. And so I guess I just want to drive home the point that, this type of work is really reliant on, as I mentioned, trust and access. It's really hard to show up and photograph in a way that conveys anything in terms of emotion or intimacy without having that. And that's something that we really kind of maintain as the highest standard and highest goal for us. So we're not a publication that really rushes stories. That's something, I worked on this for a year at least, and it's something that we continue to look for. And we're always looking for stories that make that connection between local communities and, in many ways this was a local story, but it's also one that is national and in fact international, as companies and the government kind of try to expand this type of industry. So, thank you.
Is this, oh, great. Thank you, Quinn. Yeah, so I would open it up to questions that you might have for any of the panelists. If you do, I don't know if you can hand them to the lovely Dr. Stoles. While he's collecting those, though, I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to kick off. So there's a lot of you in the audience who may be thinking about reaching out to a reporter. So if each of you could just give, 2 or 3 top tips on if somebody's wanting to reach out to you, what should they know, or what would make that the best for you as they reach out? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question because, as Reed said, unfortunately, I don't have a year to work on a story. I actually have to do 2 to 3 stories a week. I also edit. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot commanding our attention. Sometimes it's hard to prioritize what the story should be, what sort of rises to the level. It's sort of this weird thing that we do. And we have to reject a lot of good stories just because we don't have time. However, I would say, one of the best things to do is sort of to get to know the reporters so that they can trust you. I get random pitches all the time from random people, and I don't know you. Like Reed said, how do I know you? I don't know who you are. I don't know what your background is. I don't know whether I can trust you or not. So I think sort of trying to establish relationships. Also, you can always if you don't know a reporter and you feel like, oh, this is a reporter I think would be interested in covering the stories that I want to pitch them based on their past reporting. That's another thing. Look at the reporter's beat and past reporting and really make some educated guesses as to who you should pitch to, right? And you can always say, hey, can we get coffee or something? I'm interested in learning what you're interested in. And then the reporter actually knows who you are, and so can, would feel, I think, much more comfortable, at least I would, considering your pitch. So that's kind of my advice is, find the right reporters and, create relationships with them.
Okay, yeah. And I'll just piggyback onto Susan. We get calls from people who are oftentimes desperate because I'm supposed to call somebody today who's got some, sort of desperate because there's this company doing things around their house that is like they think is making them sick. And a lot of times there's not much, like, I can maybe do a story, and I mean, I'm not going to be able to help them this week get that company to stop, get the government to like stop them. And it's like very heartbreaking. It's very taxing because like, I was joking with my editor. We were doing a PFAS story. You guys know what PFAS are, forever chemicals. And I was like, yeah, so I'm doing this story. I did the story. It's out about the airport here in Pittsburgh. She's like, oh, you're going to follow this story, later on. I was like, well, I'm doing this story, so I'm assuming the whole thing's going to get situated, right? Like they're going to just deal with this PFAS thing because I did the story. So these things like go on forever, and you spend weeks, a year on these stories, and like it's just still keeps happening. So I don't really know what my point was, but we get a lot of calls from people. They're very upset, or understandably so. We try to do as much as we can with the time that we have for them and the 5 other things that are happening around us. Another just little point I would like to make is that sometimes you pitch a story to us, and we may not do that story, but like 2 years later, there's a new study out about whatever, and we need to find somebody quickly, and maybe you're in our inbox. So specificity, like good information, kind of like what I was saying, as much good information and good, if you're able to like help us find real people who this issue is affecting, that always, is a great plus. So.
Yeah, I think that's all pretty spot on. I think also just reach out. I mean, it's always a process of first being alerted to something and then looking a little deeper and figuring out what is documentable, what is not, what questions arise, and also what the time frame is. I turn around a lot of quick stories, but there are also things that simmer in the background, as Reed mentioned, that you might sit there for a while as you kind of gather string on it, and you might not know. We might be working on something or have something that we're building in the background, and that might fit in with something that someone reaches out with, and that might be the thing that sets it off. So I guess my only real point is to, my emails are open, my texts are open, so just call me.
Great, very helpful. Thank you for all of these questions that you're submitting. I'll be sure to share any that we aren't able to get to with the panelists too. And then they've also graciously agreed to stay for lunch so you can badger them at your leisure over a boxed lunch. So one from the audience that I thought was great is, how do you write about situations that involve people who are afraid or otherwise too hesitant to talk to you, to be on record? And maybe even explain on the record, on background, what that means. Anybody want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, that's actually happening more and more. And you can understand why people are afraid. It's tough. I mean, if they're afraid, you can't force them because there may be real issues and they have legitimate reasons to be afraid. And that's one thing that I try to do is like, do no harm, right? I don't want to get somebody in trouble either with their employer or with a powerful corporation. So I don't, I would never claim to be able to protect them from repercussions, right? That's one thing, is to be open and honest about that. And, basically as a reporter, you just kind of have to find somebody else who is willing to take the risk. I mean, that's kind of how I deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, just real quickly, like, off the record on background to me means basically, here's some information you need to know to do this story. You can't use my name or identifying information. But if you want to like verify this some other way, which is, you know, kind of the common practice for off the record, we don't at our show like use anonymous sources, but I'm always happy to talk to people if they want and can trust that I won't, you know, sell them out to learn more, because we always need to learn more. We can't always verify everything that people tell us, even if it's true, but we try, so.
I think just being very transparent with our process. You know, I also rely heavily on kind of word of mouth and other people vouching for me as a journalist. You know, people I've worked with, organizations that I've worked with, often are the ways that I get connected with people. And you know, for people who might be particularly vulnerable or who are going through, you know, traumatic experiences, I always find it really helpful to just take things slow. And you know, for example, in the story that I described a little bit earlier, you know, it took several months to be able to build up enough trust to even just have kind of a basic conversation about what they're going through. And you know, that is a luxury for sure in journalism. But I think that just having those conversations and being very forthcoming about the different paths that this could take and the potential risks. I mean, there are different ways of talking about reporting, you know, between public officials or companies, for example, on one hand, and residents and people that have been subject to harm on the other. And there's a much more delicate way of approaching it because you can't assume any type of media literacy with folks. You can't assume that they know what things like on background or off the record means. And so really taking it slow and just explaining those things has been really helpful.
Quinn, can I ask you a question? Am I allowed?
Yeah.
Shoot.
I know I'm allowed.
It's your job.
Did the families you talked to in for your West Virginia story or New Freeport, were there any ramifications for them? Did they get any feedback or backlash or anything?
Not in the way that like would. I think that there was a lot of concern about how this reporting would be perceived, not only by the company or by regulators who are already aware of the situation, but you know, for example, their neighbors at church. You know, their neighbors are people who might work for the company. And so that's something that's common in a lot of these rural communities where people are often divided on this based on their experiences and where they get their money. And so I think that there was an element of that. There's also always an element of, if I go public with this information, will that compromise my ability to settle with the company, for example, or to otherwise seek legal recourse. And so those are conversations that we certainly had. You know, I sat in on meetings between the family and lawyers who were considering taking their cases. And you know, we were very just kind of upfront about what the ground rules were for those conversations and what we could and could not report.
Great.
They did eventually, yeah.
Excellent questions. Okay, so this one's kind of a tricky one, so whoever volunteers to take this, but this one's from Zoom. Have any of you or any of your colleagues experienced any industry pressure to either kill or change a story that you're working on, and how do you tackle that?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, aside from one recent example, I can say that the institution I work for, you know, backed me up. And, you know, so I never, when it came to like, you know, reporting about the gas industry specifically, there was never any story that was killed, but absolutely there was pressure. I mean, I remember there were people who contacted board members. I mean, it's a public radio station, so there are board, you know, it's a nonprofit board. There are people who contacted the CEO, criticizing my reporting and whatnot. So yeah, that happens for sure.
Interesting. So they just told me we are out of time. But hopefully we can continue these conversations at the lunch tables. And I just wanted to thank you again, Susan, Reed, Quinn, for being here today and taking the time. Please, again, be sure to approach them if you'd like. And we'll also share, their emails, social media handles if you want to contact them that way. And then finally, thank you again to the organizers, Dr. Stoles, and the host, Duquesne, for having us here today. So let's enjoy some lunch.
Okay, this says 20.